Have you logged on to work when you were unwell recently? My name is Niamh Moynihan. This is the Better Workday Podcast. And in this episode, I'm talking about presenteeism and how it can impact your workday, not only on those days that you are unwell, but also beyond that. So what I've seen over the last number of years is an evolution of presenteeism at work. So historically, what you would have seen is that, let's say, for example, I was unwell, that I would go into work anyway, into the office or into the factory or into the building, because maybe I was worried about sick pay and I wanted to get paid, or maybe I was worried that my teammates wouldn't be able to pick up the slack and I didn't want to burden them. And I was able to make it to the work location. And so I got on with it and I powered through. And then what we saw was an evolution where if I didn't feel I was able to go into the office, if I had an ability to log on remotely, that I would ask my manager or my leader, could I work from home that day? And if I was in a company where there was some flexibility, that was an option. Okay, so I was still working away. I just wasn't making that commute and I wasn't obviously making any of my colleagues sick. But over the last number of years, it has changed again and it's time to talk about it. So what I see are two situations. One where people are very unwell, but they feel that because they can work from home, work in their comfy clothes, have the ongoing cups of warm drinks next to them, that why shouldn't they work? And I've even seen people who are very unwell, like in no condition to do a full day's work, still doing what they call just the important bits. So they're like, Niamh, I'm not going to do any big work today. You know, I'm just taking care of this one meeting. I leave my camera off. I'm going to take care of these few emails, this one task, and that's it. Then I'm going back to bed. And I'm saying to you, that is a big red flag because it's going to have an impact on your well-being, but also on your work, both while you're unwell and into the future. And I'm going to focus on the work piece today because I think the well-being part, look, you're probably aware of the fact that, you know, you're not going to recover properly for continuing to put yourself under stress and pressure, but we don't talk about the work part. We don't talk about the impact it's going to have on how productive you are, on how effective you are, and on people's expectations going forward. So that's where I am focusing in on today. And the first element of it is if you are unwell, and look, by unwell, I mean that, you know, if you're asked to go into the office, that you'd be like, I can't today, either because you've got the flu, you've got a stomach ache, you're in pain, whatever it is, right? You know yourself, if you think I just could not make it into the office today, that's the situation we're talking about. So instead of going to an office or some other location, you log in from home. And the first problem from a work perspective is that you're less efficient and you're less effective. So last week, you might have noticed there was no episode of the Better Workday podcast. And that's because I was unwell for the period of time I usually record it. And I'll have to be honest, I started thinking I could power through and I could get the work done. And it took me, I would say, 40 minutes of not being able to get past the intro to say, Niamh, you're not making any headway here. And I know that this applies to all different kinds of work. If your work requires creativity, consideration, problem solving, analysis, it just takes that bit longer to do it when you're not well. You're less creative. Your brain could be foggy, so making decisions is harder. You're slower. Okay. And so the end result means that you're taking longer to do work and that work mightn't be to the same quality. And now you know what I'm going to say next. It often means that you have to redo the work when you're feeling better. Have you been in that situation where you were unwell and you logged in anyway, you powered through, you did the presentation, it was nearly ready to go, and then you reviewed it the next day and you're like, no, that's not up to scratch. I need to put another half an hour into this. So the first issue when you're working when you're unwell is that your work isn't up to scratch, and that often leads to rework afterwards. And then the second thing is understanding where there are points of failure in your workflow. So like that sounds a bit technical, I know, but what I mean by that is if you continue to work when you're unwell because you're trying to make sure that things keep on moving, you will never find the parts of your work that are completely dependent on you. I work for myself. The podcast is my thing. And so if I miss an episode of the podcast, like no one is saying anything to me, but I know that there are parts in your job that are not optional and that they are solely reliant on you. And so if you continue to work, even when you're not able to, those single points of failure will never surface. And look, if you're out for a day or two, nobody might notice, it might not be a big deal. But what if you end up being unavailable to work for a longer period of time? So again, it's just, I suppose, procrastinating or deferring that future stress that's going to happen. Whereas if you do decide, I need to rest, I can't log in today, then you have to escalate to your manager or to whoever that this important task will not get done because you're the only one who can do it. And like, just related to that, I've been having conversations with different teams recently, and it's striking that in some organizations there's total resilience in the team, in the sense that people know how to do each other's jobs, people can cover for each other, and people all have the same access to systems. And if one person was out, they'd be able to kind of, pull it together. And then in other teams, like, people are very siloed. So like, there is a team, but let's say, for example, only I'd have access to certain things, or only you'd have knowledge into a certain project, which means if one of us is out, the other can't cover. From a business perspective, that's not good, because you just don't know when somebody's going to be unavailable. So by you logging in and doing the bits and pieces, even if it is just that one or two tasks that you want to make sure move along, you are putting a bandage on that problem, which means it's not going to get solved until it's a big problem. Okay, so that's the second thing for me. You're not understanding where the points of failure are in your workflow, where there's total reliance on you, where there's no backup, okay? And when we do that, then we don't have an opportunity to ask the question, how can we fix that? How can we make more resilience within our team? Because just the final thing on this also ties in then with people taking annual leave and taking full holidays. Because if you feel that, let's say you've the flu and you still have to log on to run that one report, then what are you going to do when you're taking a week off work? Either the business is going to stall because you can't do it, which is not good, or you're going to log on secretly yourself and do it, or maybe you're going to ask a colleague last minute to learn how to do it, and that's putting unnecessary pressure on them. So none of those are situations we want. And then the third thing is this idea, especially when I call it like part-time presenteeism or semi-presenteeism, or look, you can call it whatever you want, but this idea of logging in for a few bits, so you're taking most of the day off, but you're just covering off a few items. The problem with that is that it sets unrealistic expectations around what you can deliver. If you're on my team and you tell me that you're feeling unwell and you're going to take the day off, and then if an hour later I see an email from you that I'm copied on, then immediately I'm thinking, oh, they must be fine. Maybe they're feeling better. And so then I'm going to treat you as if you're well. And, that's if you're my team member and I know you. If I'm getting that kind of mixed messaging from somebody else in the organization, I'm going to have even less understanding of their situation. So you probably can relate to this, where, maybe you've been on the receiving end, you've got a message from somebody, you assume that they were, available, that they were online, that they were working, and then you ask them for something else and you did not get a response. And so there's mixed messaging around delivery, around response times, and around what you can do. And the other thing, to be honest with you, is if you keep on doing bits and pieces while you're unwell, whenever you're unwell, people will assume that you will log on and do bits and pieces, because they'll think, that's just who they are. You know what I mean? Like, unless they're on a drip in the hospital, they're going to be logging in. Now, that's not a good expectation to have, but it is something that develops. And it's not that anyone's fault or anything at all like that. It's just that when we behave in a certain way, that's what's expected. So why is this important to talk about today? Well, to be honest with you, it's important to talk about at any stage in the year. But I always find that, the start of a new quarter is a good time to reassess how the last couple of weeks have gone and how you want to maybe move forward into the next couple of months. And so take a look back over, the last 3 months. Have you worked while you're unwell? How did that go for you? Were there any unintended consequences or ripple effects? Did you feel like it was even worth that effort? And what could you do over the next couple of months to build in some resiliency into your workflows, to get more of a backup and to have more of a plan if you have to take a couple of days off work? And a final thing on this, around, I suppose, kind of going into the office, which is interesting. So if you're a manager, this is something I'd like you to consider. Again, I was having conversations with people around presenteeism and when people should take time off work and not. And a good friend of mine mentioned that because their organisation had increased their in-office days recently, people were going into the office when they were unwell with coughs and colds because they could no longer work from home. So this was a situation where the person probably was well enough to work for the day, but they were also walking around like full of snot and germs and general coldness. And because the RTO policy had moved the number of in-person days up, they felt that they could not work from home that day. So they brought the sickness in. So because we have certain policies in place, like obviously they're there for a reason, but we're kind of seeing these unintended consequences of them. Again, when we're talking about working while we're sick, it has to be that whole kind of conversation around, okay, like when should you absolutely not log on under any circumstances? And I think we all have like a practical bit of common sense with that. But again, not logging on at all means even for those small few bits, all right? And then if you're not feeling the best, but you do feel you can do a decent day's work from home, although you're supposed to be in the office that day, are we still giving people that flexibility? Or are we getting very cut and dry? And what kind of culture is that creating? And just at a bigger level, take a look at your workload, take a look at your team's workload, take a look at what you're doing on a daily basis and say, do we have single points of failure in the business? And do we know which tasks are most important to have the backup for? If you are currently feeling unwell, I hope this was the reality check that you needed. Of course, we're not going to call in sick every time we have to blow our nose. I know you take a practical and pragmatic approach to this, just like I do. But still, I have to call out those days when you know you should have taken a day off. You tried to power through, and I'd just like to question how that sets you up for the future. All right, that's it from me for today's episode. I hope you found it insightful. I hope it got you thinking. And until next time, stay well and have a better workday.